Right. Well, look, thanks everyone for joining us today. It's we obviously here for Cyber Security Awareness Month. I'm Lee Hodgson and joined here by Aaron Jacobs, Principal Solutions Engineer at Sophos. Aaron, do you want to give us a quick intro?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So, hey everyone. So my name's Aaron Jacobs. I am one of the principal solutions engineers at Sophos that in the services department. So I very much play in the security operations side. I have a lot of sort of hands-on experience. I work very closely with the security operations center, the 24/7 sort of MDR service. I work in the emergency incident response department. So I'm half emotional support counselor, half incident responder to people that get themselves in a lot of trouble. And I work very closely with our penetration testing service as well. So yeah, cover a lot of different things at Sophos Lee. But yeah, thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, great. It's good to have you here. So, look, as I said, we're here for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and this year's theme from the Australian Signals Directorate is around building our cyber safe culture. So, what that means, I guess, it's a reminder that cybersecurity it's not just a problem for IT. It's a whole of organisation challenge from leadership down through operations and across the culture of your organisation. So. And it's all about, I guess, raising awareness and helping business leaders understand what the real risks are to their organization and helping them to build resilience and take practical steps to protect themselves. So today we're going to kind of unpack each of the key themes from Cyber Awareness Month. So there's 4 key themes, so around logging and monitoring to managing legacy infrastructure, assessing third-party and supply chain risks, so things like understanding that shared responsibility with your suppliers, and we'll even get into some lessons learned from some real breaches. So Aaron, as you mentioned, brings a bit of experience from the front line there. And at the end, we're going to have a bit of time for an Ask Me Anything too. So you'll be able to, it's a kind of a unique opportunity to ask Aaron anything you might want to know about, whether it's cyber readiness, incident response, or the realities of what it's like going through a breach. So that's pretty exciting. But look, if we just move across to the first part there, so we can start with event logging. So I guess it's kind of essential, but it's often overlooked at logging, right? So having a robust logging, it's kind of one of those foundational things that are needed to be able to actually tell, well, have we had a breach and can we respond to it quickly? So without it, doesn't matter what tools you've got, they're not going to help you to spot or stop an attack in time. So, Aaron, I mean, you've seen firsthand how that lack of logging and monitoring can impact an organization during a breach. What do we need to know when it comes to getting this right?
Yeah, look, event logging is important. I can go into a lot of detail on this, and I will, right? But at a high level here, if you don't track what's going on in your environment, it's very hard to then detect and figure out when there is a threat taking place, or going back in time once something does happen and being able to go back in reverse and from a forensic perspective and figure out what the root cause was, what was taken and stuff like that. So we do see a lot of people forgetting about that, and then it becomes a much more expensive and harder exercise. So think of it like a crime scene. If a physical real crime scene, if you've got security cameras up recording, it's a lot easier to see what happened rather than trying to piece it together after the fact. So do we want to talk about legacy technology at this point, Lee, or?
I think we're probably ready to delve into that section that you had that kind of covers more off on event logging, what that means.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So look, effectively, you can't defend what you can't see, right? So when it comes down to security operations, when you are looking at a large ecosystem, there is a lot of moving parts, right? And so if you don't have visibility on that, and you can't then make those detections in real time. And that's really what our 24/7 or any 24/7 security operations center does. It's about having everything that's going on in the environment recorded, monitored, and then having rules and what we call detections in place. So when something goes slightly off, maybe Lee's account starts logging in from Uzbekistan at 2 a.m. All right, that's unusual. However, it's a successful login. Like, Lee's username and password logged in. The MFA went through as well, right? So by the book, it's a legitimate login, but it's very unusual, right? So it's about looking for that unusual behavior. When there isn't visibility, when there isn't coverage, that's where cyber actors or threat actors or hackers, for lack of a better term, when they get into an environment, that's when they go looking for things that are unmanaged, right? They find that computer in the corner. They find that air conditioning system that sits in the rack that hasn't been touched for years, that kind of stuff. That's what they use then to plan and be and set up as their base. So for everyone on the call here, especially if you're technical, right, just think about your environment today. They're more complex, they're more dispersed than they ever used to be. You know, post COVID, obviously we know there was a whole more working from home. That part's obvious, but even prior to that, right, we got into the realm of cloud applications. We got in the world of Azure and AWS, like actual public cloud environments, and then private cloud environments too. So there's a lot of different technology. Your environment is way more complex than it used to be. And if we think about it, you actually have a whole stack of different security tools in that environment today. Gartner did some stats on how many security tools. They added up 56 different security tools on average in every organization. Personally, for me, that feels a little bit too high. I don't think that would be the real world, especially not in SMB. But the reality is there is more than you realize. So just alone talking pretty basic security tools, you already have your endpoint protection and, for acronyms, EDRs or antivirus, right? There is always something on your machines that's monitoring. You then have things like email filtering. You have backup solutions. Now, backup solutions create noise around their security as well. And if someone's tampering with the backup, or if the backup sees things inside it that don't look right or interesting behavior. You get into network detection response. That's sort of on the, I don't know do I have a laser pointer here? I don't think I do. Oops, sorry. So network detection response, things that are starting to look at the actual network traffic floating around your environment and not necessarily a device. So it's looking for what maybe a rogue person on your environment or maybe what, your printer all of a sudden is doing, which doesn't look normal. We've had it for many, many years now, decades even, firewalls in place. Now, firewalls, a lot of people think they're set and forget, but firewalls actually have visibility of everything traveling inside and outside of your organization. And a lot of people forget that a firewall's job is not just to block bad things coming in, but to actually inspect the traffic and call out when something doesn't look right. And the real problem, in 100% of incidents that I've ever worked, there has always been one of these tools on screen here now screaming out about the fact that something was wrong. And when it goes real bad and ends up in our emergency incident response bucket, the issue is that someone either wasn't looking or the person that is responsible for looking didn't understand what that alert meant. More times than not, it's someone wasn't looking, because it happens at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, things like that. So especially when we get into identity tools, things like Microsoft 365, Entra ID, Okta, all of those types of platforms, they were all built natively with security thought about. Our old tools that we used to deploy back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and even beyond that, they're still in existence today. They were never created with security in mind. So they don't have native security tools, which means you have to actively bring something in to watch what's going on. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there is a lot of noise in your environment. Now, if you are getting into this sort of security component and you start thinking about the visibility across all of those attack surfaces, with all of these different things making noise, Microsoft alone, like I would challenge how many of you and your teams are actually looking at your security.microsoft.com dashboard. It would surprise you, maybe it wouldn't surprise you, but if I ask that question to most of the customers I talk with, I get a range of once a week, once a month, and what's that? Right now, the third answer is very scary because that is literally where all the 365 security alerts are. But it's not, it's a bit scary to us that people aren't looking, but it's also not surprising. So with all that different tools, every tool nowadays creates some kind of security alert. Without that central event logging, bringing them into one spot, it's very, very hard for an analyst or anyone in your organization that's responsible to deal with all that noise. Right? You can only log into so many consoles once every day. And that's why event logging in its true form, event logging on your computers, event logging on your firewalls, event logging on Microsoft 365, and all the rest of it, pulling that into one spot. So an analyst like, our friend in the middle in the blue circle here can actually deal with it and figure out and prioritize what's wrong. Now, on that train of thought, we get into the situation where most organizations lack the human expertise to stop advanced threats on their own, right? Now, this is true. This is very, very true, even in enterprise where you have internal teams. To run a 24/7 security operation, you need at least 8 to 9 people, realistically, by the time you factor in training, meetings, days off, holidays, all of that type of thing, weekends. That's a minimum. Now, most organizations, and I would argue probably almost all organizations on this call today, don't have a spare 9 people to run a 24/7 security operations center. So fundamentally, you need to outsource this task, and outsourcing it, to someone like Rodin, Sophos, whoever it is, doesn't really matter who you do it through. I very much urge you to do it because that will get you that event logging all into one spot, but then the human component on top to actually do something with the event logs. It's fundamentally flawed to implement event logging and then do nothing with it, right? There is no point in doing that. And that's where we get in. We unfortunately see a lot of customers invest in things called seams, where they then just become this big expensive bucket where everyone sticks their logs. Fundamentally, nothing happens with it, right? So you're not getting the most use out of that data. So really, if it's an MDR service, it doesn't really matter what it is. I'm using the Sophos slides in this scenario, but you'll see on the left, they're your event sources. They're all the different things in your environment that's creating a whole bunch of noise. Some of it's high critical priority security alerts like, hey, this is happening. You need to do something right now. Sometimes it's not like that, though. It's more like lower fidelity alerts that you could have quite a few of them, right? And if you have, I don't know, 100 alerts in an hour that are all low priority, is that important or is that not? Like if the baseline was 1 alert an hour and then suddenly you've got 100, that might indicate someone's trying to attack you. So there are all these different things that you can do with that noise. So generally what most intelligent systems are doing is bringing this data in, like on the left here, you see the event sources, the analysis and correlation. It's like putting it all together, making sense of that huge amount of noise, right? Just because Jimmy's clicking on something, that doesn't mean it's a threat. But what if he's clicking on something at 2 a.m. and he's not meant to access those files, or very rarely does? That might raise the suspicion a bit. So parsing that, normalizing it, enriching it with security intelligence, putting it all together, and then spitting out a prioritized list of what to do. And then, as I said, having someone ready to take action on that and step in and turn things off or disable accounts or kick the threat actor out if they manage to get in, whatever it becomes. Having an outsourced MDR service is the key to making use of that event logs. So that would be my argument to you all in doing that. Now, on that train of thought, just another slide here to sort of visualize to you all what I mean by that. That we have a thing in the industry that's called dwell time. Dwell time is the time between when an attacker gets into your network and then they do the fundamental thing that they've broken in to do. Now, in many cases, that's ransomware, where they will drop ransom, lock up all your files, lock up your business, and say you've got to pay us money or to get back out of it. But we've seen double extortion methods come in for the last few years, and that is they will steal your data first. So they remove all of your data, sensitive information first, then they will lock it up. Sometimes they don't even bother about locking up nowadays, and they just skip to the next part, which is holding you at ransom to then pay them money, or they're going to leak that information online. So dwell time is the gap between them first logging in and them doing that. Now you can see from our stats of all of last year, the median dwell time came down to only 2 days. So if I was talking to you a year or two ago, that was about 12 days. So the key here is to understanding that attackers are getting quicker. They're not mucking around. They're trying to get in and out, because the longer they spend in your environment, the more risk they have of getting caught. So they get in and out, they steal the data extremely quick. I've seen attacks as quick as 45 minutes from in and out. And then I've seen attacks 6 hours on a Saturday morning starting at 2 a.m. that took an entire 1,500 seat organization offline. So dwell time is an important thing. It's an important thing to be aware of, and ask yourself, if an attacker got in your network, what are you doing to make sure that impact, the big bad piece of stealing data or dropping ransomware or whatever it is they're trying to do, doesn't happen? And we want to detect them obviously earlier in that dwell time. All right, Lee, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, look, that obviously highlights the how critical that monitoring, or should say logging and monitoring piece is. To be honest, I'm still continually surprised by how many organizations don't actually have anything collecting logs, or as you said before, simply no one's watching, or maybe they assume someone's watching but don't fully understand what's happening there. So I guess that brings us to our next theme there, which is around legacy technology. So we've all probably been through or thinking about Windows 10 that went end of life from Microsoft just recently. it's probably a good time to maybe talk about unsupported systems and how big of a problem they can become. And it obviously extends beyond your Windows 10 operating systems. So, Aaron, from your perspective, yeah, how critical is it?
Yeah, so it's funny you raised Windows 10, right? So yes, that went end of life, and like I'll talk about why leaving things running that are legacy is a problem, but it was funny with Windows 10, right? That's end of life now. You can't update it anymore. It's funny. Windows 10 feels just like the most current recent operating system, right? It doesn't feel old yet. But that was due to the way Microsoft released it and continually improved it. And it is actually quite old now. So, but the reason, like, why is that even a problem? Why do we need to replace just Windows 10? We can start there. For example, this month, the first update after Microsoft discontinued Windows 10, there was like something like 180 security updates, and a lot of them were critical, and two of them in particular were being attacked in the wild, and they affect every version of Windows going back 20, 30 years to the most recent ones. That's a fundamental flaw. So if an attacker gets into your environment, if they have the ability to log in, they can then take advantage of that. So if you don't replace Windows 10, you're not going to get those new updates. And suddenly now you have a vulnerability, which is what you've got there on screen, Lee. So look, Windows 10, keeping everything up to date is always important. I mentioned the unmanaged legacy thing earlier. When an attacker gets in, they always go looking for that. And that is why things like patching hygienes and everything are so important. Now, Windows 10 would be considered inside your network. It's a device that your users are running on that has permissions inside your business. Now, I wanted to talk about something else that's become a huge fundamental issue at the moment, which is firewalls being targeted by attackers. Now, just in the last few months, we released a huge amount of research on this, as did almost every security research in the industry, around some of the brands here on screen about what's going on. Now, Fortinet have had a significant issue for probably 3 or 4 years now. Now, I want everyone to be aware, I am not just because I have that badge on my chest, am I trying to talk down on any other vendor. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm just reporting on the news at this point. But Fortinet since 2022-3 have had a really bad run in terms of vulnerabilities in their software that have led to attackers being able to get into the firewalls and then them basically setting themselves up and or allowing them to come back later, even after it's patched, and get back into the network. Now, why is this a problem? Well, the firewall is meant to be your perimeter. It's meant to be there for security, right? So if suddenly now we have all these vulnerabilities in firewalls or various different types of firewalls, that becomes a massive problem because they can park themselves there. They can inspect the traffic that's going through the network, and they can basically look where someone's not looking and then work through your environment and start to go and hack other devices. So Fortinet's had a run. Sonic Wall in the last few months, they seem to be flavor of the month in the last couple of months, have had a really big wild thing going on. So much through that, like for example, in the top right there, you see Sonic Wall firewalls targeted in a ransomware attacks, possibly via a 0 day. So what's a 0 day? When we talk about legacy technology, a 0 day means you have 0 days to patch your device between when this vulnerability has started being attacked by the hackers. So for example, if I find a vulnerability in Microsoft Windows today, and I release that on the dark web, wherever I release that, and all the attackers start using it, that means it's now a 0 day because Microsoft don't have a fix for it yet. There is no time for you to patch. Even if you do have a patch and then you have to deploy it, attackers are still attacking it. So when it's a firewall and that's out on the public internet and anyone, anywhere in the world can touch your firewall and you have a 0 day, that's a massive problem. So ensuring your firewalls are not, going end of life, out of legacy, making sure they're updating. There are some vendors out there, I'm not going to lie, we are one of those, but there are some vendors out there that do automatic patching of their firewalls. So it's not a manual process. That's really important. There are a whole bunch of different things you can look up things like secure by design. That helps. But at the end of the day, you need to ensure that legacy firewalls are not being the front-facing piece of your environment. Now, back to some statistics. I'm going to talk about MFA, multi-factor authentication. So it's funny how Lee and I decided to link this into the legacy component because fundamentally MFA feels, I'm sure to everyone, like it's a pretty new thing, right? It's a pretty important thing. MFA, we're just getting around to turning it on. For some people, it's still not even on, believe it or not. You look at the stats here last year, 63% of organizations that we investigated with a major attack did not have MFA on. Like, that's horrible, right? Horrible, horrible stats. I can't believe I'm standing here in 2025 telling you that. But the reality is, even with MFA, we have legacy MFA now and then newer MFA. The newer MFA are what we call fish resistant MFA, meaning that someone can't simulate the request and actually steal your MFA codes as you're going through. So that's a really common thing happening nowadays in the industry. It's called AITM, or attacker in the middle. We love making acronyms for everything in this industry. And so they can fake an email or a text message or whatever it is to you for you to go to a fake site that looks very much like a Microsoft 365 site. You enter your credentials, you do the MFA challenge, and because they're sitting in the middle of that, they actually pass that back to Microsoft and then back to you. They're able to steal that token and get into your account. So having even non-legacy MFA is a really, really big priority thing. You see here, compromised credentials, that just plugs on the back of the MFA piece. It's a really massive problem. Huge amount of attacks started with compromised credentials. So when you combine that with no MFA or poor MFA, you end up in a really bad situation, especially when we expose so much to the internet now. Microsoft 365, all of your SaaS applications, all of these portals that people log into, they're all exposed to the internet. So you can do a lot by just reducing where people can log in from. That definitely helps. It's not bulletproof. But yeah, at the end of the day, today you must have MFA on everything, and it must be secure MFA, or you still are opening yourself up to challenges. Now, RDP, another acronym, Remote Desktop Protocol. This is pretty old. This has been around in Microsoft Windows since about 2003. Now, it's not as, we've sort of gotten away from this being exposed on the public internet now, which is a good thing. There's not as much out there now, which is great. There is still some, which is horrible, but we've basically stopped publishing this stuff out to the internet wide open for anyone with a username and password to log into. However, we've forgotten about it inside your network. So what I mean by that is, if I was to able to VPN into your environment or do something and get in, and I have some legitimate credentials, normally RDP, remote desktop, is still turned on within the network, meaning I can just jump around your whole network, logging into any computer I want. The amount that RDP is actually used internally is very low. So the general recommendation here is to turn it off, reduce that attack surface. Don't leave legacy protocols like that on if you're not using them anyway, and then just increase your security. So Lee, I think I'll stop on legacy tech there and we'll move on. Otherwise, I'll never stop talking about it because it's something near and dear to my heart. But yeah, I'll throw to you here, buddy, on supply chain attacks.
Yeah, no worries. I'm still just digesting that 63% of incidents didn't have MFA. Like, we're all pretty much aware of it, right? Like, do you think it's that it's they're just not bothering, or maybe there's a fair bit of, we think it's there, but it's not done right?
Yeah, that's the latter. What you just said then, mate. Like the big stats, if we broke down that 63% a lot more, it comes down into services that people forget about. Everyone thinks of MFA on Microsoft 365 accounts, right? Microsoft are even pushing it as a default in certain situations. Not necessarily the best way, but they are doing it. What people forget about is those old legacy VPNs that they still have connecting to the network, right? The amount of attacks, it's some astronomical number in our book, 70 or 80%. I can't remember what that is, but the amount of those active incidents that have come from, I'll call them old school VPNs that don't have MFA on, is that's where those stats come from, right? It's really, really bad. So to everyone on the call, I challenge you, think about if you do use a VPN for work today and you can connect to that without MFA, it doesn't ask you for a token like it does for you to log into 365. That means I won't my hand on heart on say this, but it means you probably don't have MFA. And that's what I'm talking about. It's the legacy, the other stuff that gets forgotten about, the other SaaS portal you've signed up to that doesn't support MFA, or what is worse, they lock MFA up into a higher tier plan that you haven't paid for. That's pretty horrendous practice, but it definitely happens. So,
yeah, spot on. I suppose that's where the value of things like penetration testing and checking for vulnerabilities and those sorts of things, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, come in, just to have someone check over those things.
Yeah, looking at your attack surface, absolutely critical.
Absolutely. Well, look, moving on. I mean, even if you've got your own house in order, your organization, your business is still only as strong as your weakest link, and that also extends to the providers and partners that you work with. So when you think about the risks of those providers that you work with, whether it's service providers or SaaS software providers, they're also your risks as well. So another an example we probably heard of recently would have been Qantas, that was impacted recently through a third-party call center breach. That's part of their supply chain. That's how it's come about. And I think for a lot of us here that are here today, your IT providers and your cloud software vendors are probably the most critical and high-risk parts of your supply chain. And I think at a minimum, there's some questions that you should be asking or looking at. So things like, well, what risk management practices do they have in place? Do they have a management system like ISO 27001 where they actually have risk management processes and they're externally validated, or is it more ad hoc? Do you have clear roles and responsibilities for cybersecurity defined in your agreements with those providers? It shouldn't just be assumed. So your providers should have this documented. It should be transparent. It should just be part of the service there. And then when you're looking at your SaaS vendors, your software vendors, your cloud vendors, things like, where's our data? What data residency? Is it offshore? Data sovereignty? What laws and restrictions apply to it? And then also looking at things like business continuity, disaster recovery policies. Just because your apps are in the cloud, it's not a given that they're being backed up and they're looked after there. There's still responsibility on you as the organization to take care of those things, or do that due diligence. So, Aaron, I'm sure you've seen plenty of cases where this has gone wrong for unsuspecting businesses. Would you like to maybe share with us some insights?
Yeah, look, Lee, there's some very, very interesting ones. There's some that have just played out in the last few months impacting Salesforce customers. I'm sure you've all heard of Salesforce, one of the largest platforms out there for sales. And it was for a supply chain, like a add-in to Salesforce that was breached that allowed customers' data to be stolen. Now, when you get into the layers here, it's pretty complex because, for example, if you're a customer of Rodin, who happens to use Sophos, who happens to use Salesforce, that happens to use a plugin, we're like 4, 5, 6 layers of supply chain at this point, and it gets very messy. So you can only do what you can do yourself on your own risk management. But it's important to do at least your first layer and understand where your risks lie. Now, you mentioned risk management there, Lee, and that sort of triggered me because when anyone talks about risk management, this doesn't become a tech thing. This doesn't become a cybersecurity thing. What we're talking about here for your businesses, these are business issues, and this, at the end of the day, fundamentally, cybersecurity is a risk management exercise. And when we get into risk management, anyone in the business realm should know this. We talk about the 4 T's of risk management. We talk about transferring risk. Well, sorry, I'll start again. Let's talk about treating risk. So I acknowledge there's a risk there and I'm going to treat it. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to tolerate the risk. That's okay. I understand the risk. It's okay. I understand it. It's not a huge impact. So I'm going to tolerate that risk. I'm not going to do anything about it. Transferring the risk, we don't generally talk about insuring against it. So I'm going to transfer that risk to my insurance. So if it does happen, great, I can get paid back on it, whatever. And then we talk about terminating the risk. So terminating the risk means I'm not comfortable with that risk. Maybe I don't want to spend the money. It's not worth me spending the money. I can't do anything about it. Whatever the valid reasons are, I'm terminating that risk from my business. So I'm going to stop doing that thing. So I'm getting rid of that risk. So that's really, really important, those 4 T's of risk. So it's important to make sure you're having that at a business conversation, and supply chain attacks play right into that, right? So if you do a risk management exercise against your supply chain, whether that's your MSP or a SaaS vendor or whatever, and you're not happy with the risk, well, you might choose to terminate that risk and then go and move on to something or someone else that can provide you better practices. So, Lee, I'm going to talk about identity again for a moment, and then I'm going to actually tell a story. It's a pretty horrible story, but it comes into supply chain. So these are just some statistics around misconfigurations when we talk about 365. We see 95% of businesses, there is some kind of misconfiguration there, whether it's critical or low priority, it is. And we see that 90% of organizations have had some kind of identity breach in the past year. Like, those numbers are horrendous, but it shows you how your identities, when we say credentials, MFA, that stuff, is being attacked. They often say identity is the new perimeter, and that comes from leaked and stolen credentials, right? It's a common thing. Now, getting onto this story, I wanted to tell you about a session token theft story. I'll explain what I mean by that for anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about. But it was what I alluded to earlier, where you can have a fake 365 site when you go to Microsoft 365, when all of you guys go and log into that today, and you put in your credentials. The way you don't have to keep logging in every time you open up a new browser window is because it drops what's called an authentication session token, otherwise known as a cookie, right? Having that cookie or that token on your machine says, I'm already authenticated, this is who I am, and I've also passed MFA. That's basically what happens in that scenario. Now, in this scenario, this was session token theft. Now, this all happened. I want to give some context on who I'm talking about here. This was a MSP slash systems integrator, managed service provider slash systems integrator. They do a bit of both, right? They fit somewhere in the middle, based out of Canberra. I personally know them. Pretty horrendous story. Just happened in May. Now, in this situation, their cybersecurity person actually was busy doing 1,000 things, and I'm not blaming him. This can happen to anyone, and that's a really important point as well. Where he was busy doing stuff. He visited a site. It said there was a Chrome update, right? A Google Chrome update. He clicked on it, it downloaded it, and he ran it, right? His mistake. That thing stole this session token off his machine, right? Now, his antivirus did kick in and start carrying on and blocking and whatnot. But the problem is it takes milliseconds for this stuff to be stolen. Like, we're talking about a tiny little file sitting in your file that can go and it's instantly sent offline, right? So that happened, right? But that happened on May 27. June 20th, so that much longer, almost a month later, was when the attacker or the hacker actually started using that session and logged into Microsoft. They were able to take it, they just use it, and away they go. They're already logged in. So that's almost a month. Now, why I call that out is because just, I guess, a sidebar is what happened here through the forensic investigation we did was that session token was then sold off to a different threat actor. And that's something we call initial access broker, where some hackers just steal the stuff and then they sell it off. The next hacker comes along, buys it, and then goes and actually does the damage. So here we see almost a month later, they then use that token. Now, when they logged in, things did start warning, as you'll see down the bottom there. Things started warning and sending emails to the user saying, hey, we just saw a new login from blah, 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 right? You've all seen those emails before. Problem was the attacker, this was 2 a.m. and the attacker was sitting inside the person's email mailbox, right? So they just started deleting those warning emails, burying them. So when the user woke up, they didn't see that anything had happened. Now, during that time, over a course of 3 days, they started interacting with Teams chats and files. They started stealing stuff. And throughout that, they were able to see very quickly that there was conversations about LastPass, and this systems integrator or MSP used LastPass, which is a password manager. And that was linked to their Microsoft 365 account, right? So they managed to just move straight into LastPass and then started dumping password databases out of LastPass. There was no additional challenge. There was no additional MFA challenge to get into LastPass. So big warning there. If you log in once and then have unrestricted access to everything in your environment, no matter how secure it is, with no additional MFA challenge, potential takeaway there. They started accessing customers' 365 tenants from there. So they successfully got into 13 Microsoft 365 customer environments. And when prompted with the MFA challenge, they were successful. How were they successful? The rotating code that you may be familiar with MFA, that was saved in LastPass, sitting right next to the password, right? So because they're already there, they were able to get into MFA. Convenient, also convenient for a hacker if they happen to get into that. So they started accessing customer files within that 365 tenant. They then went ahead and started creating new user accounts in those customer environments. So if they got kicked out, they could come back. And they were actually registering their own phones and stuff as legitimate MFA devices downstream. So we're talking a few layers down. This is an example of supply chain. So these customers' supply chain, their MSP/systems integrator, was breached. And unfortunately, there was not the right things in place there to fix that. Now, it gets worse. The incident response plan didn't exist. So when this was discovered, the response to that wasn't perfect, if I'm honest. Like, I don't think any response is ever perfect, but it's probably fair for me to say, not that it was non-existent, but it wasn't in a perfect light, I guess. And that caused additional issues, huge amount of challenges for this particular company now. They've lost staff. Beyond that, there's potential lawsuits flying around. It's all still actually playing out and probably will for quite some time. So Huge personal toll on the owner of that business as well, and the mental side of it, the mental health side of it, big problems. So we should always talk about, are we prepared, right? So Lee, this is where the ASD are saying be prepared, incident readiness. Did you want to add anything before I get into that?
I do, yeah. Well, look, I guess just to clarify, the ASD are talking about quantum readiness. And look, it might sound pretty cool. It's talking about being ready for quantum computing and risks that could come. But I think, Aaron, I'd argue that most of the organizations here today would be much better off if they just focused on their readiness today. And again, asking themselves that question is are we ready? Sure you probably agree.
Yeah, look, mate, I always say one thing. When I see the damage firsthand, I show you the stats on how much I'm seeing. If we can't generally get it right today, let's at least focus there before we start pivoting our attentions and moving to something that may exist in 3, 5, 10, 20 years. We're not even sure when that quantum problem comes. So I fully respect the be ready for quantum thing. However, that's also aimed at more critical infrastructure and things of that nature as well. So it's probably a different realm to SMB, and with so much damage I see from the basics, I'd say let's focus on the basics first to get them right.
Yeah, spot on.
All right. Well, mate, what I'll do is I'll just take everyone through a bit about incident readiness and basically being prepared, right? So if I shift here and I might change track for a second and think about being ready for an incident, like training for a marathon. So with marathon training, right? No one here, and I don't know. Hopefully, we have some runners on the call that will relate to this, but no one would ever just decide to like pop on their joggers and go and run a marathon, right? Like it's not going to happen. You have to prepare. You have to be ready. There is a whole bunch of different things you need to do that you have to train. You have to get like this person here. They have the gels around their belt, right? You need to think about things like nutrition and hydration during that long an event or incident or run, right? You have to be prepared for it. You need to think about your pace. You need to think about your training program. There is a framework. You probably see where I'm going with this. There is a framework around how to run a marathon and what your 3-4 months of training should look like leading up to it. And you'll do different exercises like sprint training and then long run training and all different kinds of things. Now, I don't run, but my wife does. This is why I know this stuff, because there's an endless supply of gels and weird and wonderful shoes and all kinds of things constantly coming to my house. But in terms of if you are not prepared for that marathon and you do not do all the things that you need to do to achieve that, then ultimately you're probably going to end up looking like this guy getting carried across the line on your incident, right? And trust me, there are people that will carry you along the line and you will need help. But the reality is someone just can't carry you the whole way. Fundamentally, it's still your cyber incident, just like it is still your marathon. Sure, some people might carry you for a couple of Ks, or they may even run with you next to you and help you and scream in your ear, telling you all the good things that you need to hear. But fundamentally, you're going to carry the pain after that, right? After that incident. You need to be prepared. You need to handle it. You need to know who to call. You need to know when to call. You need to know what to do in the lead up to it. You need to know what to do on the day of it. And you need to know what to do after it. So that's what we mean when we talk about incident readiness. And talking about, we often call in the industry the incident the boom. So if you look at this slide here, spending time here on your preparation, building your incident response plans, understanding your gaps, understanding who to call, understanding what you do and don't have. All of these things, if you spend time on them now, that will influence the investment there after the boom, right? It influences your investment on your tools to prepare for that, your decision making on the day, all of the different things, and your improvement plans, all of that. If you ever get, we don't have budget, like I'm sure some of you control budgets or either need to make a case for budget. And if you do that, if you go in asking for something but you don't have the preparation, you don't have the understanding of why, haven't done that risk exercise around the 4 T's and understanding why, how big of an impact is this to my business? Do I even care? When you do that and spend that time, it absolutely will influence your investment on those things. Now, I don't actually want anyone on this call or anyone really to ever have to go through an incident. I would much prefer you didn't have to call my team freaking out, Sure, we're here to do that on our emergency incident response stuff, but it's not fun. It's not good for anyone. Just like that story I told you, the mental health implications are bad enough, let alone the business implications and the branding and all the rest of it that goes with it. Lee, you mentioned Qantas, right? Look at the Qantas damage to reputation again, right? There's only so much of this. It feels like Qantas have 9 lives, but there's only so much that you can keep taking, right? And we all don't have the luxury of the government stepping in and helping us when it gets so bad. So, you need to prepare for this stuff and be ready. So fundamentally, incident response maturity, it must evolve. Go back to the marathon. The weird thing about a marathon is you know exactly when that event is, and people train and plan for it, right? Because they've been running for thousands of years. Cybersecurity is a little bit more immature than that. And the worst part is you don't know when your marathon is going to be. That could be tomorrow. That could be this afternoon. That could be in 3 months. It could be when, Christmas Day. You don't know when it is, yet a lot of us don't plan for it. But a marathon, we do know when it is, and we do plan for it, right? So we need to be prepared that our marathon could start at any moment. So we want to be more mature in that space. So firstly, on the reactive side, can we respond? That's often what most people will ask. Now, if your response plan is, yes, I'm going to call Lee Hodgson at Rodin, that's a reaction. That's not a plan, guys. You need to be better than that. We have to have capability. Who do I call? Just like if you say, yes, I have cyber insurance, I will call them. Again, that's not a plan. That's a reaction. It's maybe one step of your plan, but your plan needs to be bigger than that. So can we respond to the fundamental technical capability of an incident? Can I take action? Can I isolate things? Can I investigate? That's your minimum. That's bare minimum. Are we prepared? Do I have IR plans in place? Do I understand my current state? Do I understand the gaps that I have? Do I understand where I'm most likely to be attacked from? These are all things in preparation that you can do. Then we get into a little bit more mature and we actually rehearse, right? So we actually will go through our plan. We will rehearse our plan. We will go through those procedures. Your plan doesn't need to be anything more than 1 page with a bunch of bullet points to start with. But just doing that exercise will get you thinking about it. And then rehearsing those bullet points will help you understand, well, hang on, I need to do more. Hang on, I need more steps here. I need more, and so forth. And it will then quickly draw out your plan and understand where everyone's at, who to call, what am I doing, where are my gaps. And then when you're really proactive, it's, are we resilient, right? Do we have governance around this? Do we have strategies to improve? Do we have proper processes? Are we reporting to the board? Is cyber risk on the board register or risk register? Is it being dealt with at that level? And are we continually improving? So, Lee, I'm going to just pivot out on the preparedness of the rehearsing part. So, guys, in the industry, we have a thing called a tabletop exercise, which some of you may have partaken in, some of you may have not. But once you've got a plan, you need to rehearse it. Now, what's the best way to rehearse it? A tabletop exercises, where we sit down, we lock ourselves in a room for half a day or whatever it's going to take, and we say, right, this situation has happened. What do we do? Like, this is real life, pretend. What do we do? How do we go about this, right? Now, when it's your first time or you're more immature at this, you may end up like the gentleman pointing the finger and say, well, Jimmy's going to do this and Jimmy's going to do that and then Jimmy's going to do that. And next thing you know, Jimmy's doing everything, right? Even if he's not, if Jimmy's just fundamentally too core to everything that's going on, apparently going to have to handle PR, going to have to handle this, going to have to contact customers, going to have to do it all while forensically investigating something, that's not okay. Now, the best tabletop exercise I've ever seen was where that happened, and then the facilitator said, Jimmy, leave the room. And it was left with a whole bunch of people that fundamentally didn't know what to do. They didn't even know where their incident response plan was kept. So it was quite interesting to see how it can fall down very, very quickly, or it can hold on to one individual person. So if you do take this, I would highly recommend getting someone to assist you with this. Lee and the crew can assist with like people to facilitate these things, help guide you on where the gaps are, write reports on how you did, all those types of things. But even going a step back and actually building out your incident response plan, like you have to start there. Moving beyond a tabletop exercise, you can then put some more real-world simulation testing in place. So when we get into this planning and preparation outside of the boardroom, we talk here about penetration testing or different types of exercises in real world, so simulation testing. So In terms of level of difficulty, on the left, you have vulnerability assessments. Now, Lee, you mentioned this earlier. They are just scans to scan the environment, see what's wrong, and tell you ultimately what's happened. Now, see if there's vulnerabilities and see what you need to assess, right? So it looks at your attack surface, it understands what's going on and if you need to patch things. But getting into things like penetration testing, where you hire a real hacker to try and hack you in a simulated environment, that's where you're really going to get those huge benefits from, right? So you're really going to get more mature by doing that, getting a formal report you can take to the board, you can take to your team, wherever it is, and say, right, this is where the flaws were. This is how they got in. We need to address these as a priority. So moving ahead, I know we're short of time, Lee, so I'll just keep things moving. Incident readiness. Some questions, 4 questions you guys can all take away and ask your organization, right? Has your organization adopted a cybersecurity framework? How do you manage incidents? Do you have an incident response plan? And are you proactively testing your readiness or your resilience? That's really, really important. And I'm a big believer in this one. Cybersecurity has become too complex for most organizations to manage effectively. I think I put all of this into all of my presentations. I think nowadays, guys, the landscape has changed. Things have got harder. You need help, so hire that help. Don't try to take it all on yourself. It's just too complex. You need help. And I feel that's true for absolutely every organization. You need to engage some professionals on this stuff. And I'm a really big believer too. This all might sound great. Yeah, cool, Aaron. No, cool story, mate. I don't have all the time in the world. You must sit around doing nothing. Just tell me to build an incident response plan and test it all day. And I get that. I appreciate that. And I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule, that 80% of your outcomes will come from 20% of your inputs, right? So for any of you that have looked at a cybersecurity framework, it's pretty daunting. There's a lot in there. But this reigns very, very true. Get the basics right, and the majority of your outcome, like your incidents, will be avoided unless you get a very novel attack coming your way or something's very, very targeted at you. But the reality is that does not happen. They're more opportunistic. They're just looking at the low-hanging fruit out there. So what's in your control? What's the 20%? Look, reduce your attack surface. If you don't have things exposed to the internet, you are way better. So if you've got legacy stuff, we've spoken about this, if you've got legacy firewalls, whatever it is, get rid of it, right? Get some kind of scanning done, get the team to help look at your attack surface and reduce it. Get a handle on your identities. So I spoke about MFA, I spoke about identities, credentials, things called SSO, single sign-on is far better. Get nice single sign-on with MFA, attach everything to it. If you get a handle on your identities and you put in good, true, proper multi-factor authentication in one central spot, that's really going to help you. Detection and response and all the things. I appreciate I am biased in this space because I live and breathe 24/7 detection and response, but truly that is critical, especially if you can have all of your identities in one spot. You can watch it and you can look for problems going on there. But more so, you need everything. All the things need to be monitored because there is a lot of good noise in your environment, but if you don't look at it, it's useless to you. And then finally, test and verify, right? Prove your worth. You're getting budget, you're paying for these tools, you're putting things in place. Don't wait to test out your security stack with a real attacker. Get a pen test, get some stuff done, and fundamentally figure out where you stand. All right, I'll take a breath, Lee. I was banging on for a while there.
No, you're right, mate. Thanks, mate. That's great. And yeah, look, obviously test and verify. That's critical. So look, we are getting towards a little bit over time here, but I think we do still have a minute. If there are any questions, you can pop them into the Q&A. Otherwise, yeah, feel free to reach out to us offline, or to myself, I should say. I do want to ask something though, Aaron, just while waiting to see if anybody does have any questions. We've got a few in the room here. What's the one thing that you think every executive, or you wish they understood before they got hit by a breach?
Did I say 2 things?
Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Firstly, I mentioned risk. I mentioned earlier it's business risk, like the 4 T's. I wish that people understood that cybersecurity now in this space is such a business decision and it's a risk management exercise. It's not a bunch of nerds telling you need some cool technology. Like, that ship has sailed. It's not that. I wish more people would realize its implications on business, on revenue, on brand awareness and on mental health, both for your employees, both for the people dealing with it and above. That is probably the number one. The second thing I wish, if you were to do one thing out of everything I told you today, it would actually be having someone watching the 24/7 detection and response piece. Like pen testing, sure, go get a pen test. But if you then get a report and do nothing with it, that's not great. Sure, do the exercise of building an incident response plan. If you never rehearse it, great. Like they're important, don't get me wrong, and there's different priorities there, but fundamentally having someone watching 24/7 that can take action for you guys, that would be my number one for anyone, mainly because of all the damage I've seen. So
yeah, spot on. So don't leave it to IT and make sure someone's watching.
that's good summary.
Easy. Well, look, we haven't got any questions, so I think.
Does everyone know where to put the questions? They're in the Q&A. You click the Q&A button there at the top.
Yeah. That's okay. Thank you very much. I hope you all found that session valuable. And as I said, maybe there's some things you might want to ask me offline, then please feel free to contact us. Otherwise, thanks everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.